The key in my hand was cold, colder than the February morning biting at my ears, colder than the concrete steps beneath my feet that had worn smooth from years of teenagers shuffling in and out one generation of discarded kids after another. It was a standard issue state key brass, gone dull from too many hands, attached to a flimsy plastic tag with my name printed in faded ink, Rebecca Lewis, Unit 7, Bed B. That number had been my entire identity for 3 years. My address when caseworkers needed to find me, my file number when judges reviewed my case, my place in a system that counted heads every night at 9 but rarely bothered to learn names. Today, that number was officially expired. I stood on the cracked steps of the Clearview group home, holding a single black trash bag that contained everything I owned. 3 changes of clothes, most of them too small now because nobody had thought to check if I'd outgrown them. A worn paperback copy of Little Women that I'd read so many times the spine had surrendered years ago, pages threatening to scatter if I opened it too roughly. And a photograph of my mother faded and soft at the edges from being held too often, studied too closely as if staring at her face might somehow bring her back or explain why she'd left us. The sky above was the color of dishwater, low and heavy, threatening snow that couldn't quite commit to falling. The air smelled like exhaust from the highway half a mile away, and the metallic tang of frozen earth. For a long moment, I didn't move. I just stood there, 1 foot still, technically inside the world I'd known and listened. For 3 years, every second of my life had been filled with noise, the television blaring game shows in the common room because nobody could agree on what to watch, so whoever got there first controlled the remote until someone bigger took it away. The shouting matches that erupted in the hallway over stolen snacks or borrowed clothes never returned, or looks that were interpreted as disrespect. The quiet, desperate sobbing that sometimes leaked through thin walls at night when younger kids thought nobody could hear them crying for mothers who were gone, or fathers who had never existed, or lives that had been stolen before they even had a chance to begin. Now there was only silence, the distant hum of traffic on the interstate, the rustle of dead leaves skittering across the frozen lawn like small brown ghosts fleeing some unseen catastrophe. Have you ever held everything you owned in a single garbage bag? My sister Emily was still inside that building. 15 years old, 3 more years left on her sentence, as we'd taken to calling it. 3 more years of Unit 7 of counted heads and lights out at 9 of caseworkers who meant well but were stretched so thin they sometimes called her by other girls' names. I'd said goodbye to her in the hallway 20 minutes ago, a clumsy, rushed embrace under the watchful eye of Timothy Clark, the floor supervisor who had given us exactly 2 minutes and not a second more. Rules were rules. Schedules were schedules. The fact that I was leaving my only family behind didn't warrant any special consideration. Emily's arms had wrapped around me so tight I could feel her heartbeat through her thin sweater, rapid and frightened, like a small bird trapped against glass. She was small for 15, always had been. The doctor said it was from the years of instability before we ended up in the system. Malnutrition leaves marks that don't always show on the surface. Sometimes the damage hides in bones that never quite reach their full length, in immune systems that struggle against every cold, in heights that plateau years before they should. She'd pulled back and looked at me with those big gray eyes, our mother's eyes, trying so hard to be brave, trying so hard not to cry, because she knew if she started, she wouldn't stop, and she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not here, not in front of Timothy Clark, who would write it down in her file as evidence of emotional instability. "You'll be fine, Becca." Her voice had cracked on my name, the nickname only she was allowed to use. The name our mother had called me when I was very small, before everything went wrong. "You'll figure it out. You always do." I'd wanted to tell her so many things, that I would come back for her, that I would find a way to get her out of this place, that we would be together again somehow, somewhere in a home that belonged to us. But Timothy had cleared his throat, and the moment was over. Now I stood alone on the steps with a trash bag and $87 in my pocket, the sum total of my state-mandated savings from 3 years of odd jobs, washing dishes at the diner down the street for a manager who paid cash and asked no questions, babysitting for a caseworker who needed weekend help and preferred not to go through official channels, tutoring younger kids in math because numbers made sense to me in a way that people often didn't. $87, a bus ticket to a city I'd never been to, the name of a shelter that was probably already full because shelters in February were always full. That was the plan, such as it was. Survive, keep breathing, figure out the rest later. It was the same plan I'd been following since I was 12 years old, since the night the police knocked on our apartment door with their hats in their hands and told us our mother was gone and there was nobody left to take us in. What Emily didn't know was that I had no plan, just $87 and a bus ticket to nowhere. My phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. It was a cheap prepaid thing I'd bought a week ago just in case someone needed to reach me, though I couldn't imagine who that would be. The screen showed an unknown number with an area code I didn't recognize. 406. Montana, maybe. I almost ignored it. Probably a wrong number, or worse, someone from the home telling me I'd forgotten to sign some form that I needed to come back and dot one more I before they would truly let me go. But something made me answer, some instinct I couldn't name. The woman's voice was crisp and professional, with the careful pronunciation of someone who spent a lot of time on the phone delivering news that would change people's lives. Not unkind, but not warm either. The voice of someone who had learned to keep emotions at a professional distance. "This is Sarah Rodriguez. I'm an attorney with the state's Office of Public Guardianship. I was assigned to your grandmother's case. Is this Rebecca Lewis?" I stopped walking. My feet simply refused to move forward, as if they understood before my brain did that whatever came next would change everything. My grandmother. The word landed strange in my mind, like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples out in every direction. I barely remembered her. A vague image from early childhood, soft and unfocused at the edges, like a photograph left too long in the sun. Flour on her weathered hands as she kneaded dough. A garden full of strange-smelling herbs that she grew in clay pots on a wooden porch that creaked when you walked across it. The smell of something sweet, baking in an oven, filling a small kitchen with warmth. We hadn't seen her since I was 8 years old. Maybe 9. A few years before our mother got really sick, before the coughing that never stopped, before the hospital visits that grew longer each time, before everything fell apart completely. Mom never wanted to talk about her. The few times I'd asked, her face would close up like a door slamming shut, and she would change the subject with a firmness that made it clear the conversation was over. Whatever had happened between them, whatever had driven them apart, was a wound too deep to examine. Yes, this is Rebecca. Who is this? I'm sorry to have to tell you this over the phone, Rebecca. Sarah's tone softened just a fraction the way professionals do when they're about to deliver bad news, when they know the words they're about to speak will leave marks. Your grandmother, Catherine Margaret Lewis, passed away 2 weeks ago. The world tilted slightly. The gray sky seemed to press down harder, as if it were trying to push me into the frozen earth. 2 weeks ago. My grandmother had been dead for 2 weeks, and I hadn't felt anything different. In the universe, hadn't sensed her passing, hadn't even known enough about her to know she was still alive until this moment when I learned she wasn't. A death I hadn't even known to prepare for. A person who had been a ghost in my memory was now a real ghost. Someone I might have had the chance to know, to ask questions of, to understand why she and my mother had stopped speaking. That chance was gone now. It had been gone for 2 weeks, and I'd been scrubbing dishes and counting days until my release, completely unaware that a door I hadn't even known existed had closed forever. Oh! It was all I could manage. I understand this is a lot to take in, especially today. Sarah paused, and I wondered how she knew what today was. But of course she knew. She had my file. She knew everything about me that could be reduced to paper and official records. She knew my birth date and my release date and every placement I'd been shuffled through since entering the system. The reason I'm calling is that you're listed as her heir. You and your sister, Emily. I laughed. It came out short and bitter, more like a cough than anything resembling amusement. The cold air turned it into a small white cloud that dissipated almost instantly, as if even my breath was impermanent. Heir, we don't. She didn't have anything. We were told she lived in a trailer park somewhere in Montana, that she had nothing, that there was no point in tracking her down. That's not entirely accurate. Sarah's voice was careful now, measured, choosing each word with precision. She owned a small property, a house and 5 acres of land in a town called Havenwood. According to her will, it passes to you and your sister jointly. But since you're now of legal age, you're listed as the primary executor. A house, land, 5 acres. The words didn't compute. They were concepts from a different universe, a different life. Things that happened to other people, people who had families and safety nets and futures that extended beyond next week. People like me didn't inherit houses. There is a complication, Rebecca, and there it was. The other shoe, the one that always dropped, no matter how briefly, hope had flickered. I'd learned that lesson early. Whenever something seemed too good to be true, it was because the catch was still hiding around the corner, waiting to reveal itself. What kind of complication? Your grandmother fell behind on property taxes for the last several years. The county has placed a lien on the property. You have 90 days to pay the delinquent amount, or they'll seize it and auction it off. Of course there was a catch. A dream dangled for a single moment, then snatched away before I could even close my fingers around it. How much? $14,622. I leaned against a chain-link fence at the edge of the group home's property. The cold metal bit into my back through my thin jacket, hard and real and grounding. $14,000. I might as well have needed 14 million. I might as well have needed the moon wrapped in a bow and delivered to my doorstep. So it's gone. There's nothing I can do. Not necessarily. Sarah paused, and when she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Less professional, more human. I've been looking at the file, Rebecca. The property is isolated. The house is listed as being in extreme disrepair. It's unlikely to fetch much at auction, maybe just enough to cover the taxes. But the land itself might have some value down the line. She paused again, longer this time. I'm not supposed to give you advice. That's not my role here. But your options are limited right now. You could walk away and let the county take it. Or you could go there. You have 90 days of legal occupancy. 90 days to figure out if there's anything worth saving. It's not a shelter in the city, but it is a roof. Technically, a roof. A broken roof on a ruined house in the middle of nowhere, saddled with a debt I could never pay. Left to me by a grandmother I barely remembered and had never understood. It was the worst offer I'd ever heard. It was also the best offer I'd ever had. Where is it? 2 bus rides and a 12-mile taxi trip later, I understood what Sarah had meant by isolated. The first bus took me out of the city, past sprawling suburbs with their identical houses and identical lawns, past strip malls and big box stores, past everything familiar and into countryside I'd never seen. The second bus wound through small towns that got progressively smaller, their main streets shrinking from 4 blocks to 2 blocks to barely 1. By the time I got off at the Greyhound station in Millbrook, Montana, the sun was setting and the temperature had dropped another 10 degrees. The station was a single room attached to a gas station staffed by a woman who barely looked up from her magazine when I asked about getting to Havenwood. "No bus goes there, honey." She turned a page with long fingernails painted a chipped red. "You'll need to call Kenneth." Kenneth turned out to be a taxi driver with a kind, weathered face and a pickup truck that had seen better decades. The cab smelled like coffee and sawdust, and the heater made a sound like an asthmatic cat, but it pumped out enough warmth that I stopped shivering by the time we hit the highway. Havenwood. His eyes crinkled at the corners in the rearview mirror. "Haven't had a fare out there in months. What takes you to that part of the world? I inherited some land there." It felt strange to say it out loud, like trying on clothes that didn't fit wearing someone else's life. "From the old Lewis place, Margaret's property." "You knew her." Everybody knew Margaret. His voice was warm with memory. She kept to herself mostly, especially toward the end. But she was a good woman, stubborn as a mule, but good. "Sorry for your loss. I didn't know what to say to that." "Thank you" felt wrong when I'd barely known her. I settled for a nod he probably couldn't see in the darkening evening. The drive took nearly an hour, winding through hills that grew steeper and roads that grew narrower. The last 20 minutes were on a dirt road that was more suggestion than path, the truck bouncing over frozen ruts, while bare trees crowded in on either side like skeletal sentinels, standing watch. Finally, Kenneth stopped at the end of a track that disappeared up a gentle slope into dense woods. "This is it, the old Lewis place. Nobody's lived up there in years." He looked at me, at my trash bag and my thin jacket and my city shoes that were already soaked through from the snow that had started falling somewhere around Millbrook. A flicker of something crossed his weathered face. Concern, maybe, or pity. The look people give stray dogs they can't take home. He hesitated, then reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small foil-wrapped bundle. "Here." "His wife's banana bread. You look like you could use it." I mumbled a thank you, my throat too tight to say more. He just nodded the way people do when words aren't really necessary. Then he drove away, and I was alone. The tail lights disappeared around a bend, red blinking out into darkness, and the silence closed in like water filling a glass. No traffic, no sirens, no television or shouting or crying through thin walls, just the wind in the bare trees and the soft whisper of snow falling. I started walking. The property wasn't just in disrepair, it was being actively reclaimed by nature, pulled back into the earth, inch by inch. The dirt road that led up to the house was choked with weeds. Even in winter, young saplings growing defiantly in the middle of the track, their bare branches reaching up toward the gray sky. As I climbed the slope, the woods on either side grew thicker, pressing in until the path was barely wide enough for one person. Then I saw it. The house stood in a small clearing at the top of the hill. It was a small, one-story clapboard structure, the kind you see in old photographs of the American frontier. It had been white once, maybe a long time ago. The paint had long since peeled away, leaving the wood a silvery, splintered gray that seemed to glow faintly in the dying light. The porch roof sagged at a drunken angle, held up by one last stubborn post that looked like it might surrender at any moment. A shutter hung from a single hinge, banging softly in the breeze, like a door that nobody had remembered to close. Some of the windows were dark and empty, their glass long since shattered by storms or stones or simply time. Others had been boarded up with plywood that had warped and split over the years. The front steps were missing their middle board entirely, leaving a gap like a knocked-out tooth. It was the saddest place I'd ever seen. My heart, which had been slowly climbing toward something like hope over the past few hours, sank back down into my shoes. This was a mistake, a cruel joke. There was no roof here, not a safe one, not one that would keep out the cold or the rain or the crushing weight of $14,000 in debt. Have you ever walked into a place and thought, "This is the biggest mistake of my life"? I pushed open the front door anyway. It groaned in protest, the hinges screaming rust and neglect. The air inside was thick and musty, heavy with the smell of damp and decay and forgotten things. Dust motes danced in the weak light, filtering through grimy windows. The floor was littered with debris, fallen plaster from a ceiling that had given up trying, curled leaves that had blown in through broken panes, the desiccated bodies of insects that had crawled in here to die. In the main room, a single armchair sat draped in a dusty white sheet like a ghost waiting for company that would never arrive. A small cast-iron stove stood in the corner, rusted solid, its pipe disconnected and hanging at an angle. The kitchen was worse. The linoleum floor was peeling up in brittle curls, revealing rotted subflooring beneath. A fine layer of green mold coated the countertops. When I opened a cupboard, a mouse skittered out and disappeared into a hole in the wall, making my heart jump into my throat. This wasn't a home, it was a tomb. I walked through the two small bedrooms, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The feeling of despair was so thick it was hard to breathe. Every step revealed another problem, another failure, another reason why this place was beyond saving. Sarah had been wrong. There was nothing here worth fighting for, nothing worth 90 days of legal occupancy, nothing but rot and ruin and the fading memory of someone I'd never really known. I was about to turn and leave to walk the 12 miles back to town and try my luck with the bus station floor when something caught my eye. On the wall in the back bedroom, next to a window that looked out onto the overgrown hillside behind the house, there was a single clean square. The wallpaper around it was faded and water-stained, yellowed with age, and damaged by moisture. But this one spot was brighter, newer, as if a picture had hung there for years, protecting the paper beneath from light and time. There was a small nail still in the wall, the head slightly bent, as if something had been hung there recently and then removed. It was nothing, a minor detail in a house full of decay. But it was the only sign of deliberate care in the entire place, the only evidence that someone at some point had cherished something here, had chosen to protect it. Curiosity, or maybe just a desperate need to find one thing that wasn't broken, made me go to the window. I looked out at the backyard. It was a chaotic mess of weeds and thorny bushes, sloping up into dense woods. The snow was falling heavier now, starting to cover the brown and gray with a thin layer of white. But as my eyes scanned the hillside, adjusting to the fading light, I saw something unnatural. A line, a straight, horizontal line in the earth, about 30 feet up the slope from the back of the house. It was almost perfectly concealed by overgrown grass and tangled vines, barely visible under the fresh snow. But it was there. It looked like the top of a doorframe buried in the hillside. Every instinct told me this is what Grandma wanted me to find. I went back outside. The cold air was a welcome shock after the stale, suffocating atmosphere of the house. My breath came out in white clouds as I circled around to the back and started climbing the slippery hillside. As I got closer, pushing through frozen brambles that scratched at my hands, I saw that it wasn't just one line. There were two. Two massive rusted metal plates set side by side, almost flush with the hillside. They were cellar doors, storm doors, but they weren't attached to the house. They were just here in the middle of the hill, hidden by years of overgrowth. A thick, rusted chain was looped through two heavy iron handles and secured with a massive, ancient-looking padlock. I knelt down, my jeans immediately, soaking up the damp cold from the ground, and pulled at the tangle of vines covering the doors. The metal beneath was cold and pitted with age. It looked like it hadn't been opened in a generation. Why would anyone build a cellar this far from the house? Why bury it in a hillside? Why lock it with a chain this thick? A new feeling began to push through the despair that had settled over me. It was fragile, tentative, barely more than a whisper, but it was there. Something was here, something hidden, something my grandmother had wanted to protect. I spent the next hour searching the dilapidated shed behind the house. It was a disaster of rust and neglect. Old tools with rotted handles, broken clay pots, bags of cement that had hardened into solid blocks years ago. In a cobweb-filled corner behind a rusted wheelbarrow, I found what I was looking for. A heavy-duty bolt cutter. The handles were rusted, but when I worked them back and forth, they moved. The jaws were still sharp. I carried it back up the hill. The weight of the tool was reassuring in my hands, solid and purposeful. The snow was falling steadily now, covering my tracks as I climbed. I positioned the jaws of the bolt cutter around one of the thick chain links. I braced my feet against the frozen ground and put all my weight into it. The metal groaned. I squeezed harder. My arms shook with the strain. My knuckles went white. My teeth clenched until my jaw ached. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sudden, shockingly loud crack that echoed across the silent hillside, the link snapped. The chain fell away and clattered against the metal doors. I stood there breathing hard, my heart pounding. The sound had been so loud it seemed impossible that the whole world hadn't heard it. But the woods remained silent. The snow continued to fall. I was alone. The doors were free. I grabbed one of the iron handles. It was heavy, far heavier than I'd expected. I braced my feet and pulled. Nothing. The door was sealed shut by years of rust and settled earth. I tried again, grunting with effort. My boots slipped on the wet leaves and fresh snow. Still nothing. Frustration welled up in me, hot and sharp. I'd come this far, found this hidden thing, and now I couldn't even open it. I slumped down on the cold ground, my back against the immovable doors. The snow was soaking through my jeans, but I barely felt it. The despair was creeping back, whispering that I'd been foolish to hope. Then I saw it, a long, sturdy piece of scrap metal lying near the shed. I must have walked past it 3 times without noticing. I scrambled back down the hill, my frozen fingers fumbling as I grabbed the metal bar. It was heavy, maybe 3 feet long, with a flattened end, a pry bar. I wedged the tip into the seam between the 2 doors and pushed down with all my body weight. The metal screeched in protest. A line of rust flaked away like dried blood. I did it again and again. Slowly, agonizingly, a gap began to open between the doors. It was just a sliver, at first a thin line of darkness, but it was enough. I jammed the pry bar in deeper and heaved with everything I had, with a deep groaning shudder that seemed to come from the very bones of the hill. The door lifted, a few inches at first, then more. A puff of air escaped from the darkness within, and that air was different, cool and dry, not cold and damp like the house. It didn't smell of rot or mold or decay. It smelled of earth and stone and something else, something like possibility. I worked the pry bar back and forth, widening the gap until I could get my fingers underneath the edge of the door. I took a deep breath, braced myself, and lifted. The door swung upward with surprising ease, its hinges finally overcoming the seal of rust and time. It settled open with a soft thud, revealing a set of steep concrete steps leading down into absolute blackness. I stood there for a moment, staring into the dark. Then I pulled out my cheap phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam was small and weak, but it cut a narrow cone through the darkness, revealing smooth, poured concrete walls, not rough-hewn stone like an old root cellar. Concrete, modern, built to last. My hand was shaking, but I took the first step down, then the next, then the next. The air grew cooler with each step, but not uncomfortably cold. It was the temperature of a basement stable and insulated from the winter above. At the bottom of the stairs, maybe 12 feet down, I found myself facing a heavy steel door. A fire door, the kind you see in commercial buildings. It had a simple lever handle, slightly dulled by time, but still solid. This was no root cellar, no storm shelter. This was something else entirely. I reached out my fingers, trembling slightly, and pushed the lever down. The door swung inward without a sound. The hinges must have been oiled. Recently. I stepped across the threshold, sweeping the thin beam of my phone's flashlight across the space, and I froze. It was a single large room, maybe 20 feet by 30 feet. The walls were smooth, sealed concrete, painted a clean, pristine white that seemed to glow in the beam of my flashlight. The floor was polished concrete, as well smooth and level. It was bone dry. And it was clean, immaculately, impossibly clean. Not a speck of dust, not a cobweb, not a single sign of the decay that had consumed the house above. In the center of the room sat a sturdy wooden workbench, the kind you might find in a carpenter's shop. The wood was smooth, sanded by patient hands, darkened with age, but well maintained. On the far wall, built-in wooden shelves held neat rows of supplies, boxes of canned goods organized by type, jugs of water, first aid kits, blankets wrapped in plastic, tools still in their original packaging, hammers and saws and screwdrivers never used. A small generator sat in one corner with a full fuel can beside it. In another corner was a simple cot, neatly made with clean white sheets and a thick wool blanket. And on the workbench, directly in the center of the room, sat a single small wooden box. It was a simple thing, handcrafted, made of dark polished cherry wood. It had a small brass latch, tarnished with age, but still functional. It was the only object in the entire room that looked personal, that looked old, that looked like it had been waiting for me. I walked toward it slowly, my footsteps silent on the smooth floor. The space felt sacred somehow, like a church, like a place of immense intention, immense effort, immense love. Someone had built this, someone had stocked it, someone had prepared for a day that might never come. I reached the workbench. The box wasn't locked. I lifted the small brass latch with trembling fingers. The lid opened with a soft click. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were three things: a stack of $100 bills, bound with a simple rubber band. The paper was crisp and clean. The bills still new. I counted them with shaking hands. 150 bills, $15,000. A small tarnished silver key on a thin chain engraved with the initials R.L. and the year 2010, and a thick sealed envelope with a single word written on the front in shaky but elegant script: Rebecca. My breath caught in my chest. This was it. This was the reason. This was why she'd built this place, hidden it from the world, protected it with chains and locks and years of silence. My grandmother had left this for me. I carefully lifted the envelope. It was heavy, full of pages. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside were sheets of paper, covered in that same delicate handwriting. The letters were uneven in places, written by hands that had grown old and unsteady, but the words themselves were clear. I sat down on the edge of the cot. I propped my phone against a can of beans on the shelf, angling the light so it fell across the pages, and I began to read. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this letter, then I am gone, and the world has failed you in the way I always feared it would. I am so sorry, more sorry than words can possibly express. I need you to understand that my absence from your life was never because I didn't love you. It was never because I didn't want you. The truth is much more complicated and much more painful. Your mother, my beautiful, troubled daughter Julia, made choices I could never understand. She was determined to make her own way in the world, to prove that she didn't need anyone. When she cut me out of her life and out of yours and Emily's, it broke my heart in ways I still cannot fully describe. I tried to reach her. I wrote letters every month for 5 years. 60 letters, Rebecca. Every one of them returned unopened. I made phone calls until she changed her number. I even drove to that apartment once in 2009, sat in my truck outside for 3 hours, trying to work up the courage to knock. But I saw her through the window, saw how thin she'd gotten, how tired she looked, and I knew that if I went up there, I would only make things worse. She'd made her choice, her boundary, and as much as it destroyed me, I respected it. But I never ever stopped thinking about you. She chose to respect my mother's pain, even though it destroyed her, even though it meant never seeing us grow up. I started saving, just a little at a time. My pension was small, but I lived simply. I didn't need much. And I bought this piece of land, this broken down house that nobody else wanted, and I started to build. I hired a man from the next town over, Robert Williams, to help me with the digging and the concrete. He's a good man, honest, keeps to himself. He never asked questions about what I was building or why, and I never offered answers. The rest I did myself. Every weekend for 10 years, Rebecca, I would drive out here early Saturday morning before the sun came up and work until Sunday night when it got too dark to see. I learned how to pour concrete from library books and YouTube videos. I learned how to wire electrical panels and install plumbing and seal walls against moisture. I made mistakes, a lot of them. I had to tear things out and start over more times than I can count. My hands aren't as steady as they used to be. My back aches in ways I never knew possible. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed, and I would lie there thinking about how much easier it would be to just stop, to give up, to accept that I would never see my granddaughters again. But every time I wanted to quit, every time I wanted to surrender to the pain, I would think of you and Emily, of the granddaughters I wasn't allowed to know, and I would get up and I would keep going. 520 weekends, 15,600 hours of labor, 83 bags of cement, 240 steel rebar pieces, 4 complete rebuilds of the eastern wall because I kept getting the waterproofing wrong. This place, this room, is the physical shape of my love for you. It's the home I couldn't give you in person, the safety I couldn't provide while I was alive, the proof that you were never ever forgotten. The money should be enough to settle the debt with the county. It will give you a foothold, a chance to start. But it won't be easy, Rebecca. Nothing in this life ever is. The house above is a ruin. I know that. I never had the money or the strength to fix it while also building this place. I had to choose, and I chose this. I put all my energy, all my hope, all my love into this room, into these walls, into this sanctuary. This cellar is your foundation, your starting point. The rest you'll have to build yourself. But there's something else you need to know, something important. This land is not just dirt and trees. There's a spring on the northern edge of the property, a deep, clean source of water that flows year-round, even in the driest summers. A survey was done for the county years ago, and they tried to buy the land from me then. They said it was for a municipal well, but I investigated. I asked questions. I found out the truth. A large bottling company called Clearwater Development wants the water rights. They've been buying up land all around here, quietly through shell corporations and false names. They want to drain the spring, bottle the water, and sell it back to the world at a profit. They came to me once in 2005. A man named Richard Miller, in an expensive suit with a smile that never reached his eyes. He offered me $300,000, more money than I'd ever seen in my life. I turned him down, and they made me pay for that decision. Richard spread rumors about me in town, said I was unstable, said I was hoarding weapons, preparing for some kind of apocalypse, that I was dangerous. People who had known me for decades suddenly wouldn't meet my eyes in the grocery store. Friends I'd had coffee with every week stopped returning my calls. Neighbors who had waved at me for years started crossing the street when they saw me coming. I spent the last years of my life alone, Rebecca, isolated, cut off from everyone I'd known because I wouldn't sell what wasn't theirs to take. I don't regret it. Not for a moment. Not for a single second. Because this land, this water, it matters. It's one of the last clean sources in this entire region. The people in this town, they get their water from old wells that are starting to run dry, from municipal systems that are straining under the weight of drought and demand. If the company gets this spring, they'll drain it, they'll bottle it, they'll ship it off to cities where people will pay $3 for something that should be free. And this town will be left with nothing. Richard Miller died 5 years ago. Heart attack. But his son Christopher took over the company. He'll come for you, Rebecca. He'll come with lawyers and money and promises. He'll offer you enough to set you and Emily up for life anywhere you want to go. Enough to walk away from this place and never look back. You could take it. No one would blame you. After everything you've been through, after everything you've suffered, you deserve an easy life. You deserve to be safe and comfortable and free from struggle. But I want to ask you to consider another option. Keeping this land means a life of fighting. It means being poor when you could be rich. It means protecting something that's not just yours, that belongs to a whole community that might not even thank you for it. It means becoming the kind of person who chooses the hard right over the easy wrong. I can't make this decision for you. It wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be fair. It has to be yours. That's the real inheritance, Rebecca. Not the land, not the money, not even this room. The choice. The chance to decide what kind of person you're going to be. Whatever you decide, know this: I loved you. I saw you even from a distance, even through the wall your mother built between us, and I believed in the woman you would become, your loving grandmother, Margaret Lewis. I finished the letter and let the pages fall into my lap. For a long time, I sat there in the silent, clean white room surrounded by the smell of earth and stone and a decade of hope. The flashlight on my phone cast strange shadows on the walls, making the space feel both larger and smaller than it was. And I wept. I cried for the grandmother I'd never gotten to know, for the years she'd spent building this place alone, driven by nothing but love and the desperate hope that someday I might need it. I cried for my mother, who had been so afraid of needing anyone that she'd cut off the one person who had never stopped trying to help, who had built walls so high that even death couldn't breach them. I cried for Emily, still trapped in a system that saw her as a number, a file, a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. And I cried for myself, for the scared little girl I had been, for the terrified 18-year-old I was now sitting in a hole in the ground, holding a choice that felt heavier than the whole world. The weight of it was crushing. Sell, take the money, get Emily, get a real apartment in a real city with real heat and real safety, give her the life she deserved. New clothes, good food, a school without metal detectors and caseworkers watching her every move. Security? Stability? Peace? Wasn't that my only job? To protect her, to give her something better than what we'd been given? Who cared about some spring in a town I'd never seen? The world had never done a single thing for us. Why did we owe it anything? But then I looked around the room again, the neatly stacked cans organized by type and expiration date, the carefully folded blankets still sealed in their plastic wrapping, the workbench worn smooth by years of patient labor by hands that had grown old and tired, but had never stopped believing. I thought of my grandmother driving out here alone every Saturday for a decade, teaching herself skills she'd never needed, building something she might never see used, her back aching, her hands blistered, her heart breaking with every year that passed without word from her granddaughters. And still she kept going. Selling this place wouldn't just be selling land and water. It would be selling this. Her love, her sacrifice, her last desperate act of protection. It would be taking the one pure thing I'd ever been given and putting a price tag on it. I thought about Emily. What would she want? Not the money, not really. Emily had never cared about things. What she wanted was a home, a place where she felt safe, a place that was ours. She used to draw pictures constantly at the group home. Houses with gardens and tire swings, kitchens with tables big enough for a family, bedrooms with windows that looked out on fields instead of parking lots. Never mansions, never anything grand, just homes. Could this be that a ruined house and a concrete bunker on a hill in the middle of nowhere? It was insane. It was impossible. The work would be immense. I had no skills, no experience, no idea what I was doing. I would have to fight a corporation that had already broken my grandmother. I would have to learn everything from scratch. I would probably fail. And even if I didn't fail, I would be poor. I would struggle. I would have to fight for every single thing for the rest of my life. But I would be fighting for something real, something that mattered, something that wasn't just about surviving, but about living, about becoming the kind of person my grandmother believed I could be. My phone buzzed in my hand, making me jump. A text from Sarah Rodriguez, the lawyer. The 90-day notice of intent to seize was just posted on the property today. Clock is officially ticking. Also, a Christopher Martinez from Clearwater Development called my office this afternoon asking about the Lewis property status. He said he'd be in Havenwood next week and wanted to discuss options with the new owner. Be ready, Rebecca. They're not wasting any time. Clearwater Development, the bottling company, they were already moving, already circling. Suddenly, the choice didn't feel like a philosophical exercise anymore. It felt like a battle line being drawn. I took a deep breath. The air in the bunker was still and cool. It felt solid, grounded, real. If protecting something meant living in poverty, would you do it? I knew what I had to do. The walk back to town took nearly 4 hours. By the time I reached the main street of Havenwood, the sun had fully risen, turning the snow-covered world into a blinding expanse of white. My feet were numb in my soaked shoes. My hands had stopped hurting somewhere around mile 8, which I knew wasn't a good sign. But I barely felt any of it. In my pocket was $15,000 in cash. In my heart was a decision made, and in my mind was a countdown, 90 days. The town of Havenwood was small. One main street with a handful of storefronts, most of them closed for the winter or closed for good. A diner with a faded red awning and frost on its windows. A hardware store with tools displayed in a dusty window that looked like it hadn't been changed in years. A post office the size of a garden shed. A white-steepled Baptist church at the end of the street, its bell tower reaching toward the pale winter sky. It looked tired, but not defeated. The buildings were old, but someone was maintaining them. The sidewalks were cleared of snow. American flags hung limp in the cold air outside the post office. This was the town my grandmother had protected, the people she had chosen over money. I found the county tax office in the back of the small town hall, a brick building with white columns that had probably been standing since before anyone living had been born. The clerk was a stern-faced woman with gray hair pulled back tight and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked at me over the top of those glasses when I walked in, her eyes taking in my wet clothes, my tangled hair, my general appearance of someone who had spent the night in a bunker and then walked 12 miles through snow. "Can I help you? I'm here to pay the back taxes on the Lewis property." I pulled the stack of bills from my pocket and set them on the counter between us. Her eyebrows rose just slightly, the only crack in her professional composure. She counted the money 3 times, slowly, carefully, as if she expected it to disappear. Then she pulled out forms and stamps and made me sign things in triplicate. She typed information into an ancient computer that wheezed and hummed like it might give up at any moment. Finally, she picked up a heavy stamp and brought it down on the final form with a satisfying thud. "The lien is removed." Her voice was still flat, but there was something in her eyes, a hint of grudging respect. "The property is yours, Miss Lewis. Free and clear. February 18th, 2020. Walking out of that office, I felt 10 feet tall. I'd done it. The first step. The land was safe, but I knew the bigger fight was just beginning. I found a payphone outside the post office and used my last quarters to call Sarah Rodriguez. The metal was cold against my ear as I listened to the ring. "Sarah, I paid the taxes." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind that stretches when someone is recalculating everything they thought they knew. "Rebecca, how? Where did you get $14,000? My grandmother left some money. It was hidden on the property." Another pause, longer this time. "I see. Well, that changes things considerably. You own the land outright now. What are you planning to do? I want to keep it." The words came out steadier than I felt. "And I want to get my sister. I want to be her legal guardian." The silence that followed was the longest yet. "Rebecca." Sarah's voice shifted into that careful tone professionals use when they were about to explain why something is impossible. "That's an extremely difficult path. To gain custody, you'll have to prove you can provide a stable home, a source of income, a safe environment. The court won't place a minor in a house that's uninhabitable. There will be inspections, interviews, psychological evaluations. They'll fight you every step of the way. This could take a year, maybe more." "I know. And Clearwater Development isn't going to sit back and wait while you figure things out. They'll make your life very difficult. I know that too. But this is our home. I'm going to make it work." She sighed, not from exasperation, but from something deeper. The sound of someone who had seen too much, hoped for too little, and was suddenly confronted with a spark of impossible defiance. "All right, here's what you need to do. Establish residency immediately. Get a job, any job. Start documenting every improvement you make to that property. Take photographs. Keep receipts. Create a paper trail that proves you're serious. I'll start filing the preliminary paperwork for the guardianship petition." She paused again. "But Rebecca, don't expect miracles. This is going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. 1 year. Emily had to stay in that place for another year. The thought was a punch to the gut, but it didn't break me. It hardened me. 1 year, 365 days, I would count every single one. What about the developer, this Christopher Martinez person? What do I do about him, Stahl? Don't agree to anything. Don't sign anything. Just listen. Find out what they want and what they're willing to pay. Information is your only weapon right now. I can do that. And Rebecca, be careful. These people have resources you can't imagine. They've been doing this a long time. Don't underestimate them. I threw myself into the work with a fury I didn't know I possessed. For the first week, I barely slept. I would wake before dawn in the bunker, climb the hill to the house, and work until it was time to walk to town looking for employment. The days fell into a brutal rhythm. Wake, work, walk, return, work until dark, sleep, repeat. The first task was making the house habitable enough that I could at least move through it without risk of injury. I spent 3 days clearing debris, filling trash bags with fallen plaster and dead leaves, and the evidence of years of neglect. My hands blistered, then calloused. The physical labor was grounding. With every swing of a hammer, with every board I tore out, I felt like I was clearing away. Not just the rot in the house, but something inside myself. The hopelessness, the fear, the feeling of being disposable. On the 6th day, a sleek black Cadillac Escalade crawled up my dirt road. I watched it from the porch, where I was wrestling with a stubborn section of railing hammer in hand. The vehicle looked completely out of place, too clean, and too expensive for the rutted track. It moved slowly, as if the driver feared scratching the paint on saplings that had no business growing in a driveway. A man got out, mid-40s, with graying hair, swept back in a style that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Navy Armani suit that fit like it had been tailored specifically for his frame. Shoes that gleamed despite the dust already settling on them, Italian leather that probably ran $800. He looked at the house at me in my work clothes with my hammer and smiled. The expression never reached his eyes. Rebecca Lewis. He walked toward me with his hand extended confident in a way that came from never being told no. Christopher Martinez, Clearwater Development. I believe my office contacted your attorney. I didn't take his hand. I know who you are. His smile flickered for just a moment, a crack in the facade, before widening again. More practice this time. Miss Lewis, let me be direct with you. I respect that in business. This property is a wreck, a liability. You've got a house that's one stiff breeze from falling down and land that isn't worth much without significant investment. He paused, letting his words sink in like he was revealing a truth I hadn't already lived. We're prepared to make you a very generous offer. We'll take this whole problem off your hands. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder with the Clearwater logo embossed on the front in silver. $500,000 cash. He said the number like it was a magic spell, like the words themselves had power to make me do whatever he wanted. And maybe they should have. $500,000 was more money than I'd ever dreamed of, more than my mother had earned in her entire life, more than I could earn in a decade of any job I might find. With that money, I could get Emily tomorrow. We could move anywhere, California, New York, anywhere with warmth and opportunity and futures that didn't involve frozen hands and aching backs. I could see it all shimmering in front of me like a mirage in the desert. And then I thought of the letter. My grandmother alone driving out here every Saturday for a decade, teaching herself skills she'd never needed, building something she might never see used, her back aching, her hands blistering, her heart breaking year after year. And still she kept going because she believed I would need it, because she believed I was worth fighting for. The property is not for sale. Christopher's smile tightened. The warmth drained from his eyes like water from a cracked basin, revealing something cold underneath. Miss Lewis, let's be realistic here. What are you going to do with this place? Camp out in a collapsing house? You're 18 years old with no education, no skills, and no money. That 500,000 is more than you'll ever see in your entire lifetime. He leaned closer. I could smell his cologne. Expensive and cloying, the scent of money and entitlement. Take the win. I held his gaze without flinching. My answer hasn't changed. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. I could see him recalculating, reassessing. He'd expected a scared kid, an easy mark, someone who would crumble at the first show of force. He was seeing something else now, something that didn't fit his script. All right. His voice had changed. The friendly salesman was gone, replaced by something harder, something that had been there all along, hiding beneath the smile. Let me be even more direct. We have ways of acquiring property, Miss Lewis. Legal ways. We can petition the county to declare this structure a blight. We can challenge your survey lines. We can tie you up in litigation until you can't afford to eat, let alone pay a lawyer. He straightened his tie with deliberate precision. Or you can take the $500,000 and walk away. Rich, free, no more struggling. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something almost conversational. It makes you wonder how often we judge people too quickly. I understand your sister is still in the foster system. Emily, correct. 15 years old. Such a vulnerable age. It must be hard for her being stuck there while you're out here. Things can get complicated for kids in that situation. The threat hung in the air between us, barely veiled. He wasn't just threatening me. He was threatening Emily. He turned and walked back to his SUV. Before he got in, he looked back at me one more time. We'll be in touch, Miss Lewis. Do give my regards to your sister when you see her. The door closed. The engine purred to life. The Escalade rolled away down the dirt road, leaving me standing on my broken porch with my heart pounding and my hands clenched into fists around the hammer. The next morning I walked into town and found the hardware store. The building sat on Main Street with faded gold letters, spelling out Williams Hardware across a wooden sign that creaked in the wind. The window display was cluttered with tools and paint cans and a handwritten sign advertising a sale on snow shovels that looked like it had been there since last winter. A bell chimed when I pushed open the door. The smell hit me immediately. Sawdust and metal and the faint chemical sharpness of paint. It was a good smell, a real smell, the smell of things being built. The man behind the counter was in his 60s with weathered hands and shrewd eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from years of patient work. He looked up when I entered, taking in my appearance with a single quick glance that seemed to see everything: the dirt under my fingernails, the sawdust in my hair, the desperation I was trying to hide. "You're the Lewis girl." It wasn't a question. Margaret's granddaughter. "Yes, sir." I paused suddenly, uncertain how to ask for what I needed. "I'm looking for a job." He studied me for a long moment. His eyes lingered on my hands, which were red and raw from a week of work scraped from pulling nails and peeling linoleum. "You planning to fix up that place?" "Yes, sir." He grunted a sound that might have been approval or skepticism or both. "Show up tomorrow at 7. Don't be late. $12 an hour, cash weekly. We'll see how you work out." It wasn't much, but it was a start. "Thank you." Then, Because I'd learned that information was power, I added, "I'm Rebecca, but everyone calls me Becca." He nodded once, a sharp economical movement. "Robert Williams, and this isn't charity. You understand. You work hard, you get paid. You slack off, you're gone." Clear, he turned back to the catalog he'd been reading, dismissing me. "And Rebecca. My wife, Patricia, makes more food than two old people can possibly eat. She'll probably bring you dinner tomorrow, whether you want it or not. Don't be too proud to accept it." The work at the hardware store was harder than I'd expected, and exactly what I needed. Robert taught me with few words and endless patience. How to sweat copper pipe without flooding a joint. How to wire a three-way switch without electrocuting myself. How to read wood grain to know if a board would split or hold. He explained things, once demonstrated twice, then watched while I tried. When I made mistakes, he didn't criticize. He just showed me again. Patricia arrived every afternoon at 4 with containers of food. Beef stew, thick with vegetables, on Monday. Chicken casserole, with a golden crust, on Tuesday. Lasagna that was still warm from the oven on Wednesday, wrapped in towels to keep the heat. "You're too skinny." She pressed the containers into my hands with a firmness that allowed no argument. My grandmother taught me that the best way to love someone is to feed them. Now eat. I stopped protesting after the first week. The food was better than anything I'd eaten in 3 years, and I was burning through calories faster than I could replace them with the canned goods from the bunker. But Robert asked questions, casual questions that seemed innocent at first. "What's your plan for the property?" "Long term, have you thought about the spring? What will you do with all that water? Any developers contacted you yet?" I answered honestly, thinking he was just making conversation that he cared because he'd known my grandmother. I told him about Christopher's visit, about the offer, about my plan to keep the land and get Emily. I didn't know that every word I spoke was being reported. I didn't know that Robert drove home each night and sat at his kitchen table with the phone in his hand, wrestling with something I couldn't see. I didn't know that at 9 p.m. exactly his phone would ring, that Christopher Martinez would be on the other end asking, "What did she say today about the spring? Is she planning to stay long-term? Any signs of weakness?" I didn't know that Robert was accepting $500 in cash every week, delivered in a white envelope left under his truck's windshield wiper. I didn't know that this arrangement had started the day after my grandmother's funeral, when Christopher had shown up at the hardware store with a simple proposition: "Tell me everything the girl says and does. In exchange, I'll forgive the $3,000 you still owe Margaret's estate, plus $500 a week for as long as it takes." I didn't know any of this because Robert was good at hiding things, and because I was too desperate for help to question why it was being offered. On my 3rd week in Havenwood, I walked to the Baptist church. The white clapboard building stood at the end of Main Street, its steeple reaching toward a sky that threatened more snow. The structure dated back to 1892, according to the cornerstone, built by hands that were dust now, but had left something solid behind. I found Pastor David Jones in his office, a small room lined with theological books and smelling of old paper and coffee gone cold. He was in his early 50s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, sitting at a desk covered in sermon notes and budget spreadsheets. He looked up when I knocked, and something shifted in his expression. Not quite recognition, but awareness. "You're Margaret Lewis's granddaughter." "Yes, sir. I'm Rebecca." He gestured to a chair, but his posture remained guarded. "Your grandmother stopped coming here 12 years ago. After the rumors, people have long memories in small towns, Miss Lewis. I didn't come to talk about the past, Pastor Jones. I sat down without being explicitly invited. I came to ask for help. Christopher Martinez and Clearwater Development want the spring on my property. If they get it, they'll drain it and sell the water back to this town in plastic bottles. 47 families currently use that spring. If I'm asking you to help protect something that belongs to this community. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled under his chin. And what exactly are you asking for? Help fixing the house? Materials, if you can spare them. Labor, if anyone's willing. I need to make it habitable so I can bring my sister home. He was quiet for a long moment, studying me with eyes that had seen too many people make promises they couldn't keep. Miss Lewis, your grandmother's situation caused a lot of division in this congregation. Some people still believe the things that were said about her. Helping you would be complicated. While you think about it and pray on it, 47 families are drinking from that spring. I met his gaze and held it. What happens when it's gone? I'll pray on it. It wasn't a yes. It wasn't quite a no. It was the sound of a door left slightly ajar. I stood to leave, but turned back at the threshold. My grandmother spent 10 years building a shelter for granddaughters she never got to meet. She did it alone because everyone in this town had turned their backs on her. I'm not asking you to forget that. I'm asking you to be better than the people who let it happen. 3 days later, Michelle Martin appeared at my property. She was 32, with tired eyes and work-worn hands, driving a Toyota so old the passenger door was held shut with wire. 2 kids climbed out of the back seat. Lily, 8 years old, with gap-toothed smile and pigtails. Jake, 5, clutching a stuffed dinosaur with one eye missing. Your grandma let us take water from the spring. Michelle's voice was quiet but steady. Our well ran dry in 2018. The cost to dig a new one was $12,000. We didn't have it. We still don't. Every week I drive up here and fill 8 5-gallon jugs. Margaret never asked for a penny. She just said, "Take what you need." She held out a plastic container. Chocolate chip cookies still warm. Lily baked them this morning when I told her we were coming to meet Miss Margaret's granddaughter. Lily thrust forward a piece of construction paper. She'd drawn a picture in crayon, a stick figure labeled Rebecca standing next to a blue scribble labeled Spring with a big red heart above it. Thank you for not selling the water. Jake peered up at me with solemn brown eyes. Mama says if the water goes away, we won't have baths anymore. Something cracked open in my chest. This wasn't just about me and Emily. It was about Lily and Jake and dozens of other kids. When everyone tells you you're wrong, how do you know if you're being brave or just stubborn? Michelle understood what I was thinking without me saying it. There are 6 other families who use the spring regularly, more when their wells run low in summer. You're not fighting for strangers, Rebecca. You're fighting for us. After Michelle left, I walked to the northern edge of my property. The spring was there, just as my grandmother had described in her letter. A small clearing surrounded by old-growth ferns, their fronds brown and curled with winter, but still beautiful. Water welled up from a fissure in dark rock so clear it was almost invisible, trickling down to form a small, pristine creek that wound its way through the woods. I knelt and cupped my hands. The water was so cold it burned, and so pure it tasted like nothing at all, like drinking winter itself. This was what Clearwater wanted. This was what my grandmother had died protecting. And now it was mine to protect, or surrender. On the 4th week, while cleaning the bunker's workbench, for the 3rd time, my hand bumped against something underneath. A soft click echoed in the concrete room. I froze, looked down. A seam had appeared in the floor that I'd never noticed before, a 4 by 4 foot section outlined in hairline cracks. I grabbed the pry bar I'd used to open the cellar doors and wedged it into the gap. The section lifted with surprising ease, revealing hydraulic hinges and a cavity below. A hidden room beneath the bunker. My phone's flashlight beam cut down into darkness, illuminating concrete steps leading to another space. This one was smaller, 8 by 10 feet, filing cabinet, lockbox, shelves. I descended carefully, each step deliberate, and opened the first drawer of the cabinet. Inside were documents in plastic sleeves, meticulously organized. The first folder contained a geological survey from 1998. United States Geological Survey letterhead, technical language about aquifer depth and recharge rates and water quality. The numbers told a story. The Lewis Spring produced 50,000 gallons per day. Purity rated at 99.8%, requiring no filtration. The aquifer depth reached 340 feet. And at the bottom of the report, in a box labeled Estimated Commercial Value, someone had written $5 million 1998 valuation. $5 million. 20 years ago. The spring was worth 10 times what Christopher had offered for the entire property. He'd been buying it for pennies on the dollar, betting I wouldn't know any better. The second folder held maps. Geological surveys showing the aquifer's extent spreading like underground veins beneath 3 counties: Havenwood, Millbrook, Clearfield. If Clearwater tapped into it at my property, they wouldn't just be taking my water. They'd be draining the source for 3,200 households across 3 jurisdictions. The third folder made my hands shake. Printed emails dated 2005 through 2010. Richard Miller to county officials. Subject lines like "Proposal for Municipal Partnership" and "Generous Offer Pending." The messages were cordial, professional, but between the lines ran an unmistakable current of threat. One email referenced alternative acquisition strategies if the Lewis property couldn't be purchased. Another attached a photograph Richard Miller shaking hands with County Commissioner Warren Blake, a white envelope visible between their palms. My grandmother had documented everything. She'd known they were trying to buy off the county. She'd collected evidence like a prosecutor building a case she'd never get to present. The fourth folder held her journals, spiral notebooks filled with her handwriting growing shakier as the years progressed. Entries dated from 2010 to 2015. I flipped to the last page. December 15th, 2015. Today, I finished the secret room. If Rebecca ever finds this, she'll know the truth. The spring is worth $5 million, but it's worth more than money. It's life for this town. Fight for it, Rebecca. Don't let them win like they won against me. Show them what we're made of. Below the journals sat a metal box sealed against moisture. Engraved on the lid, "For Rebecca. Open when you're ready to fight." Inside, I found a USB drive labeled Progress Videos 2010 to 2020, 147 files. A handwritten list of names and addresses, 47 families who used the spring, and another letter. Rebecca, if you found this room, you're serious about staying. These 47 families are counting on you. Don't let them down, and don't let Christopher Martinez bully you like his father bullied me. You're stronger than I ever was. Fight. Win. Make me proud. Grandma Margaret. I plugged the USB drive into my phone using an adapter I'd bought for $3 at the hardware store. The first video file opened. My grandmother's face filled the small screen. She looked younger, maybe 55, hair still more brown than gray. She was sitting in the bunker early morning light, coming through the open cellar doors behind her. Day one of building the foundation. My back already hurts, but I can't stop. Her voice was steady, matter of fact, the tone of someone documenting a project. Rebecca and Emily need this. Even if I never see them again, they need a safe place to land. So I'm building it, one bag of concrete at a time. The video ended. I sat in that hidden room for 30 minutes, unable to move. She'd recorded her work every weekend for 10 years. 147 videos of a woman building hope in concrete and rebar and waterproof sealant. I called Sarah Rodriguez from the bunker's entrance where my phone could get signal. I found documents proving Clearwater tried to bribe county officials in 2008. Geological surveys showing the spring is worth $5 million. My grandmother documented everything. Keep them locked up. Don't tell anyone they exist except me. Sarah's voice was sharp with sudden interest. We might need them in court. And Rebecca, be very careful. If Christopher finds out you have those documents, he'll do whatever it takes to get them back. That night my phone rang at 11:34. Emily. Her voice was ragged with crying. Becca. They took everything. My drawings. All of them. What happened, the girls from Unit 9? They broke into my locker while I was at dinner and ripped them all up. She gulped air between words, trying to control the sobs. The house I drew from your description. The garden. Mom's portrait I spent 3 months on. All of it. Just shredded and stuffed in the trash. Did you tell Mr. Clark? He said nobody saw anything, so there's nothing he can do. Her voice broke completely. They destroyed everything, Becca. 3 months of work. Gone. I pressed my forehead against the cool concrete wall of the bunker, rage and helplessness warring in my chest. I'm so sorry, Em. There's something else. She took a shuddering breath. There's a couple, Michael and Barbara Johnson. They've been coming to the home for months talking to caseworkers. They want to adopt a teenager. My stomach dropped. That's good, right? That's what the system is supposed to do. They want to adopt me. Just me. Not both of us. They told the caseworkers they can only handle one child. But Becca, they showed me pictures of their house. It's huge, 6,000 square feet in a gated community. They said I could have my own art studio with north-facing windows and professional supplies, private school, art lessons with a teacher who went to Juilliard, summer trips to Europe to visit museums. Her voice dropped to a whisper. They said I'd never have to worry about anything again. What did you tell them? I said no. I said I'm waiting for you, but the caseworkers keep bringing it up. They keep saying it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And if I don't have a stable placement within 12 months, they might transfer me to a different facility, one that specializes in older kids. It's 150 miles away, Becca. I'd be so far from you. She was crying again, harder now. I'm scared. I don't want to lose you, but I'm also scared of being stuck here forever. What if you can't get the house ready? What if something goes wrong? Have you ever made a promise you weren't 100% sure you could keep? Listen to me, Em. You won't lose me. Not ever. I'm going to fix this house. I'm going to pass inspection. I'm going to bring you home. But what if you can't? Then I'll figure it out, because that's what we do. Right, right. She sniffled, trying to pull herself together. I love you, Becca. I love you too. Stay strong for me. After we hung up, I sat in the bunker for an hour, staring at the white walls my grandmother had painted with such care. 1 year. I had 1 year to turn a ruin into a home, to find stable employment, to prepare for a fight with a corporation that had already destroyed one woman's life. The letter from the county arrived on a Tuesday. Official letterhead. Notice of unsafe structure complaint. Clearwater Development had filed a petition with the county health department claiming my house was a public hazard. Inspector Stephen Taylor would conduct a full evaluation in 5 days. If the structure failed to meet basic safety codes, immediate condemnation would follow. Seizure but auction. I called Sarah Rodriguez with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. They're trying to condemn it. They want to take it before I can fix it. This is their strategy. Force you to fix everything in 5 days, knowing you can't. Sarah's voice was grim. Everything must be up to code. Roof, walls, plumbing, electrical, heating, fire safety. If you fail even one item, you lose everything. I don't have money for contractors. I barely have money for materials. Then you need to find help. Fast. I ran to Williams Hardware. 8:47 in the morning, my breath coming in white clouds in the February cold. Robert was opening the store, turning the key in the lock. I nearly crashed into him. Robert, I need help. The words tumbled out before I could think. 5 days before the inspector comes. If the house isn't ready, I lose everything. Emily, the land, the spring, all of it. I don't have money to pay contractors, but I'll work it off. Double shifts for a year. I'll do anything. He looked at me for a long moment. Really looked like he was seeing something he'd been trying not to see for weeks. I stood there, desperate and trembling, 18 years old, and utterly alone, holding the weight of a choice I shouldn't have to make. Something shifted in his face, some internal battle resolving itself in a way I couldn't understand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his truck keys. Take the truck. I'll load up what you need, but the materials I can't afford. Your grandmother lent me $10,000 when my business was dying in 2008. Never asked for a penny of interest. Never pressured me for payment. He met my eyes. This is me paying her back. Patricia will organize the church ladies. I'll make some calls. The next 5 days became a blur of motion and noise and hands that never stopped moving. Monday at 6 a.m. Robert arrived with his truck loaded with lumber and drywall and tools. Patricia followed in her sedan with thermoses of coffee and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. By 7, Nancy Wilson had appeared with 6 women from the Baptist church, all wearing work gloves and determined expressions. Day 1 we gutted. Tore out moldy drywall, ripped up ruined linoleum, exposed the bones of the house to see what was salvageable. The pile of debris in the yard grew to the size of a small car. Day 2, George White showed up at 5:30 in the morning. Retired plumber, 67 years old, with 30 years of experience and hands that still knew how to sweat a perfect joint. Pastor David Jones arrived at 10 with 4 men from the congregation. I prayed on it. God told me to help. They spent the day fixing the plumbing while Robert and I worked on the electrical panel. Day 3. The crowd swelled to 15 people. Michelle Martin brought 3 other single mothers who formed a cleaning crew, scrubbing floors and walls with industrial-strength bleach. Two teenagers from the diner, Jordan and Tyler, showed up wanting to earn extra cash and stayed when they learned we were working for free. We installed new drywall, ran new electrical wire, replaced rotted floor joists in the living room. Day 4 started at 4:30 in the morning with 18 people. Robert led a crew onto the roof, patching holes and laying new tin sheets. George installed the heating unit Robert had found at an estate sale for $200. I worked on Emily's room with Patricia and Nancy, painting the walls lavender, installing a new window, building a bookshelf from plans Robert had sketched on a piece of cardboard. Day 5, we started at 3 a.m. Robert, Patricia, George, and I did the final touches: caulking, trim work, door, hardware, light fixtures. At 6, everyone went home to clean up. At 8:45, I stood on my newly repaired porch and waited. Inspector Stephen Taylor arrived exactly at 9. He was 42 methodical, carrying a clipboard with 47 items on his safety checklist. He didn't smile, didn't make small talk, just walked through every room testing outlets, running water, checking smoke detectors, examining the roof from the attic access. 90 minutes later, he emerged from the back bedroom. This property was flagged for condemnation based on the complaint filed. However, based on my inspection today, I cannot justify that assessment. The structure is stable. All basic systems are functional and up to code. There are cosmetic improvements needed, but nothing constituting immediate danger. He handed me a yellow copy of his report. "You pass, Miss Lewis. For now." My knees nearly gave out. I gripped the porch railing to stay upright. "Thank you." He drove away. I stood there, unable to move, until Patricia appeared beside me with a box. She'd baked 2 apple pies the night before. Nancy arrived with homemade grape juice. Michelle brought pizza. By 2 p.m., 15 people were celebrating on my porch and in my yard, eating and laughing and telling stories about the week. Robert pulled me aside. "Your grandma would be proud, kiddo." That night at 9:23, my phone rang. Christopher Martinez, his voice smooth as oil. "Congratulations on passing inspection, Miss Lewis. Impressive work for someone with no experience. Thank you." I was overly aggressive in our last conversation. "Let me make a new offer. $1 million. Cash. Wire transfer the same day you sign, for the land water rights and a simple non-disclosure agreement." "Mr. Martinez, my answer hasn't changed. This property will never belong to Clearwater, not for any price." His voice cooled by several degrees. "Not even for your sister's future. $1 million could get Emily out today. Best schools, best life, everything you can't give her. My sister doesn't need money. She needs family. She needs a home. You're making a serious mistake. We'll be in touch." He hung up. I sat on the porch swing Robert had repaired, watching the stars come out over the mountains, and felt no doubt at all. The knock came at 1:47 in the morning. I'd been lying awake in the bunker, unable to sleep, despite exhaustion that went bone deep. I climbed the stairs and found Robert standing outside, still fully dressed. His truck was running in the driveway, headlights cutting through the dark. "Rebecca, before the town wakes up and starts congratulating us, I need to tell you something." His voice was rough. "You deserve to know the truth." I stepped out into the cold. "What truth?" "Christopher Martinez paid me to spy on you. $500 a week. I reported everything you said, every plan you made, every weakness I could find." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" When your grandma died, I still owed her $3,000 from the $10,000 loan. Christopher found out. He said if I spied on you, he'd forgive the debt plus pay me $500 a week. His hands were shaking. I took the money, Rebecca. For 3 weeks, I betrayed Margaret's trust. The man I trusted like a grandfather had been selling me out to the enemy. Every night at 9 p.m., Christopher called, asked what you said about the spring, about your plans. Any weakness I could find, I told him you were stubborn, that you wouldn't sell, that you were fixing the house. He pulled out a notebook, 40 pages of daily reports. And here's the $1,500 he paid me, plus the $3,000 I owe Margaret. He thrust an envelope at me. $4,500 cash. But watching you work these past weeks, seeing you fight like she fought, I couldn't keep lying. I'm with you now, for real. I swear on Margaret's grave. I opened the notebook, read the first page, second page, my words recorded, my struggles documented, ammunition handed to my enemy. How could you? My grandmother trusted you. I know. His voice cracked. I'm sorry doesn't fix it, but starting today, no more secrets. I stood there in the freezing dark, holding the evidence of betrayal and the weight of a choice. My grandmother had forgiven, had believed people could change, had spent 10 years building hope for granddaughters who might never appreciate it. Keep the money. You earned it this past week. You brought an entire town to help me. I can't, but from now on, no more secrets. Deal, deal. Robert's eyes were wet. I won't let you down again. At 6 a.m., his phone rang. I was still there, neither of us having moved. Robert answered on speaker. Why didn't you report last night? Christopher's voice was sharp. What happened? I quit, Christopher. I'm not your spy anymore. You'll regret this, old man. You and that girl. Maybe, but at least I'll sleep at night. Robert ended the call. The sun was rising over the mountains, painting the snow-covered hills in shades of orange and gold. My house stood solid behind us, flawed, incomplete, but standing, and I wasn't alone anymore. The weeks after the inspection passed in a rhythm of work and waiting. I kept my job at the hardware store, arriving at 7 every morning and staying until Robert locked the doors at 6. My hands learned the weight of different hammers, the grain patterns that meant oak versus pine, the precise angle needed to cut, crown molding. Patricia continued bringing food, but now she also brought advice. How to can vegetables for winter, which seeds to plant in spring, the names of people in town who might need odd jobs done. The house transformed slowly. I replaced broken windows one at a time, learning to cut glass and set panes. Painted the exterior in sections, working my way around the perimeter over 3 weekends. Fixed the steps, the railing, the warped boards on the porch floor. It wasn't beautiful yet, but it was becoming something that resembled a home. In the 10th week, my phone rang at 2 in the afternoon. A number I recognized from my old life. Amanda Thompson, my friend from the group home, the girl who'd slept in the bunk above mine for 18 months, who'd taught me how to hide snacks from the other girls, who'd sworn we'd get an apartment together someday. Becca. Her voice was tight with something between concern and anger. I heard you turned down $1 million. Word travels fast. Are you insane? She didn't wait for an answer. Take the money. We could get a place in Seattle like we talked about. Get Emily out. Live like normal people instead of playing pioneer woman in the middle of nowhere. This isn't about money, Amanda. Then what is it about proving something to a dead woman who didn't even bother to meet you? You don't owe these strangers anything. They're not strangers anymore. I watched through the window as Michelle's Toyota pulled up Lily and Jake tumbling out to bring me more drawings. They helped me when I had nothing. Right. And when winter hits, and you're freezing in that shack, those helpful strangers will be in their warm houses. She paused, and her voice dropped. You're throwing your life away for what a principal, Pride Emily deserves better than poverty and a falling down house. Emily deserves family. Family doesn't keep you warm. Money does. Amanda's frustration crackled through the speaker. Don't call me when you're broke and homeless and wishing you'd listened. The line went dead. I stood there holding the phone, questioning everything for the first time in weeks. What would you have chosen? $1,000,000 or a legacy? Maybe Amanda was right. Maybe I was being stubborn instead of brave. Maybe choosing the hard path when an easy one existed wasn't noble, but stupid. But then Lily knocked on the door with a new crayon drawing. This one showed stick figures labeled Me and Rebecca standing by the blue spring under a yellow sun. Thank you for keeping the water, the careful block letters read. And the doubt evaporated like morning frost. The call from Emily came 3 weeks later, Monday afternoon, 3:47. Her voice was different. Not crying this time. Worse. Resigned. Becca, I need to tell you something. Please don't hate me. A long pause where I could hear her gathering courage. I said yes to the Johnsons. The world tilted on its axis. What? After they destroyed my drawings, I felt broken, like nothing I made mattered, like I was stuck in this place where beautiful things just get torn up and thrown away. Her words came faster now, tumbling over each other. The caseworkers kept showing me pictures of their house. Mrs. Johnson took me there last week. Becca, the art studio is bigger than our entire common room. North-facing windows, professional easels, every supply you can imagine. Oil paints, watercolors, pastels, things I've only seen in catalogs. She took a shuddering breath. They said I could take lessons with a real teacher, someone who went to Juilliard, and the school has an art program. I could get a scholarship to art college. Real training, not just drawing in margins during study hall. My sister, my only family, was choosing a life I could never give her, and I couldn't even be angry because she deserved all of it. I know I promised to wait, but I'm 15, and I've been in the system for 3 years. What if your house doesn't pass the next inspection? What if something goes wrong? The Johnsons are offering certainty, security, everything you've been trying to give me. Her voice cracked. They're offering everything you can't. I understand. The words came out steadier than I felt. I want you safe and happy. If they can give you that, then I'm glad. You're not mad. I'm heartbroken, but I'm not mad. The silence stretched between us, filling with all the things we couldn't say. Finally she whispered, I love you, Becca. I love you too. Always. After she hung up, I walked down into the bunker and sat at the workbench for 4 hours. Didn't cry, didn't move, just stared at the white walls my grandmother had painted with such patience and thought about how you can do everything right and still lose. Robert found me at 6:47 when I didn't show up to close the store. He and Patricia sat on either side of me on the cot, not speaking. Finally, Patricia took my hand. She'll come back. Rich houses aren't homes. Give her time to see the difference. But what if she doesn't? What if perfect is good enough? Then you'll still have built something worth building. Patricia squeezed tighter. And you'll still be the kind of person who keeps promises even when nobody's watching. Emily moved in with Michael and Barbara Johnson on a Thursday. I wasn't there, wasn't invited. The caseworkers handled the transition, packing her few belongings into boxes and driving her to the gated community on the east side of Portland. She texted me a photo that evening. Her new bedroom, 15 by 20 feet, with a queen bed and a walk-in closet. Everything looked expensive and coordinated and utterly impersonal. The first week, she sent updates daily. The art studio with its skylight and custom easel. Hillcrest Academy with its manicured lawns and students in Ralph Lauren uniforms. Dinners at 6 p.m. sharp with cloth napkins and conversations about stock portfolios and upcoming trips to Italy. Week 2, the messages came less frequently. More measured. I'm fine became I'm good. Became everything's great. The photos showed her smiling in new clothes, standing in pristine rooms, but something in her eyes looked dim, like a light turned down low. On the second Saturday, she called. "Becca, what kind of wood did Robert use for the bookshelf in my room?" The question was so unexpected, I had to think. "Oak, I think." "Why?" "Just wondering." A pause. "It's really well made. I wish I could have seen it finished." "You can still." "I have to go. Mrs. Johnson is taking me to the art supply store." "Talk soon." Wednesday of week 2. Another call. "Do you remember the color we painted my room? Lavender. Patricia helped me pick it out." "Right." Lavender. Another pause, longer this time. "There's no color in my room here. Everything's white and beige. Mrs. Johnson says it's sophisticated, but I miss the lavender." Thursday evening, her voice was different on the phone, tighter. "I drew something today, a picture of our house from memory, the white exterior, the porch swing, the mountains behind it. I used watercolors." "That sounds beautiful." Mrs. Johnson saw it. She asked why I was drawing a shack when I live in a real home now. Emily's breathing had changed, coming faster. She said we should focus on positive subjects like flowers and landscapes, not depressing buildings that remind me of poverty. "Did you tell her it's our home?" I tried. "Mr. Johnson said I should be grateful for everything they've given me." Like gratitude means forgetting where I came from. Friday at 7:15, my phone lit up. "Can I tell you something without you getting upset?" "Always. I miss Patricia's beef stew. I miss Robert's terrible jokes about sawdust. I miss the way you hum when you're painting." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Everything here is perfect. The food, the schedule, the opportunities. But it's empty. Nobody asks how I feel. They just tell me how lucky I am." Saturday of the second week, 11:34 at night. "Come get me, please." I grabbed Robert's truck keys from where he'd left them on my kitchen counter with a note, "In case you need it." Drove 6 hours through the night, my hands tight on the wheel, coffee from a gas station going cold in the cup holder. The sky was starting to lighten when I pulled up to the Johnson house. It sat behind iron gates in a development called Heritage Hills. 6,000 square feet of stone and glass landscaping that looked like it required a full-time gardener, 3-car garage with doors that probably cost more than most people's cars. A security guard at the entrance had checked my name against a list before letting me through. Emily was waiting on the front steps with a single duffel bag. She'd left behind all the new clothes, the expensive art supplies, everything they'd bought her. Kept only what she'd brought from the group home and, one thing, a charcoal sketch she'd done of our house. Mrs. Johnson stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "This is a mistake. She'll regret this. We gave her opportunities you'll never afford. You gave her things. I met her cold stare without flinching. I'm giving her family. Emily climbed into the truck. She didn't look back. We drove in silence for the first hour, Montana spreading out around us in shades of green and gray and endless sky. Finally she spoke. That house isn't a shack, it's ours, and I'm done letting people tell me what I should want. The drive home took 6 hours. We pulled up at 6:23 in the evening to find Robert, Patricia, Nancy, George, Michelle, with Lily and Jake and David Jones all waiting in my yard. Someone had strung up a banner made from a bedsheet, "Welcome home." Emily, Patricia had made pizza. Nancy brought balloons. Lily and Jake presented Emily with drawings they'd made stick figures, labeled with her name, surrounded by hearts and flowers. Emily stood in the doorway of her lavender room and cried, not from sadness this time, from relief, from recognition, from finally understanding that home isn't measured in square footage or window quality or prestigious zip codes. It's measured in the people who remember how you take your coffee and know your favorite color and build you bookshelves with their own hands because they want you to have a place to keep your stories. 2 months later, a county vehicle pulled into my driveway. White sedan with official plates. A woman in her mid-50s climbed out, gray hair, pulled into a tight bun, wire-rimmed glasses, catching the afternoon sun. She carried a leather portfolio and moved with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd done this exact thing 1,000 times. Linda Brown. She extended her hand. I'm here to conduct the final home inspection for your guardianship petition. I'd been expecting this visit for weeks, preparing for it with the same intensity I'd brought to the 5-day renovation. Emily and I had cleaned every surface, organized every closet, stocked the refrigerator with fresh food. I'd documented every improvement with photographs and receipts, created binders of financial records showing steady employment and careful budgeting, gathered letters from Robert, Patricia, David Jones, Michelle, Nancy, George. 40 people had written statements supporting my petition. Linda walked through each room with meticulous attention, opened cupboards, tested faucets, checked smoke detectors, examined the heating system. She reviewed Emily's bedroom, noting the handmade furniture, the art supplies, the window that looked out over the mountains, inspected the kitchen, the bathroom, the living room, where we'd set up a small study area for homework. An hour into the inspection, I led her outside and down the hill to the bunker. I'd debated whether to show her this space. It wasn't required for the inspection, but something told me it mattered. That she needed to see the foundation everything else was built on. She descended the concrete steps behind me. I pushed open the steel door and stepped aside. Linda walked into the pristine white room and stopped. Just stopped, as still as stone in the center of the space. Her eyes traveled across the handmade shelves, the workbench worn smooth by patient hands, the supplies still organized with such care. The cot in the corner, the generator, the walls that had taken years to build and seal and perfect. She stood there for 5 minutes without speaking. I waited, barely breathing, watching emotions play across her face. Surprise, recognition, something that looked like grief. Finally, she removed her glasses and cleaned them with shaking hands. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. Your grandmother and I went to college together." The words hung in the air, impossible. What Montana State University class of 1987? We were roommates for 2 years. best friends. I was maid of honor at her wedding. Linda's voice had gone soft, traveling back through decades. She got pregnant at 22. Your mother, Julia, the father left. Her parents disowned her because she refused to give the baby up. I helped her through it, let her stay in my apartment. I was there when Julia was born, holding Margaret's hand through every contraction. She looked around the bunker again, and her eyes were wet. We stayed close for years after college. I watched Julia take her first steps. But Margaret moved to Havenwood in 1995, and we slowly lost touch. I got married, moved to Helena, started working for the state. Life got busy. We meant to visit, to call, to stay connected. But years passed, and suddenly we hadn't spoken in a decade. When I saw the Lewis property in my case file, I knew it was her. Linda wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, a gesture that seemed too vulnerable for someone so professional. I requested this case specifically. I wanted to see what she'd built. I needed to understand why she disappeared from everyone's life. She turned in a slow circle, taking in every detail. This bunker is Margaret. This is exactly who she was. Stubborn, loving, never giving up on people even when they gave up on her. She spent 10 years building this alone for granddaughters she'd never met. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Linda crossed to me and pulled me into a hug that smelled like lavender soap and old grief. I'm sorry I wasn't there for her at the end. I should have tried harder to stay in touch. I should have been the kind of friend who doesn't let time create distance. She pulled back, composing herself. In 23 years doing this job, I've never seen anything like this. I'll submit my report tomorrow. It will be extremely favorable. Your grandmother would be so proud of you, Rebecca. You're exactly like her. The hearing was scheduled for mid-January in the county courthouse. Small courtroom wood paneling that had darkened with age-high windows, letting in winter light. Judge Thomas Rodriguez, presiding, 58 years old, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every kind of family configuration imaginable. Sarah Rodriguez sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her briefcase open and files organized with military precision. Across the aisle sat Mark Anderson, attorney for Clearwater Development. He'd inserted himself into the proceedings with a motion claiming the company had a vested interest in the outcome since they held preliminary negotiations regarding the property. Sarah had nearly laughed him out of her office when the filing arrived, but the judge had allowed limited participation. Your Honor, Anderson stood when recognized. Miss Lewis is only 19 years old, no college degree, minimum wage employment at a hardware store. While we appreciate her efforts, the question must be asked: how can she provide stable housing, adequate nutrition, educational opportunities, and health care for a 15-year-old minor? He gestured to papers in front of him. The Johnson family offered superior resources: a home valued at $1.2 million, private education, professional art instruction. Emily Lewis rejected these opportunities to live in what is essentially a renovated shack. This court must consider whether this decision serves the minor's best interests or merely the guardian's emotional needs. Sarah stood, and her voice could have cut glass. Your Honor, I'd like to submit several items for the court's consideration. First, the report from Linda Brown, senior caseworker with 23 years of experience. She held up the document, 18 pages of single-spaced text. Mrs. Brown writes, and I quote, "In my entire career, I have never witnessed such compelling evidence of familial love and sacrifice. The improvements Miss Lewis made to the property demonstrate not only capability, but dedication. More importantly, the community support documented through 40 letters of recommendation shows a network of care that no amount of money can purchase. Sarah placed the report on the judge's bench and returned to the table. Second before and after photographs of the property. She produced 2 large-format images, the house as it stood when Rebecca inherited it and as it stands today. The transformation was undeniable, even in still images. Third, financial documentation showing Miss Lewis maintains steady employment, has zero debt, owns her home free and clear, and maintains a modest but stable household budget. She added another folder to the growing stack. Fourth, a handwritten statement from Emily Lewis herself. Sarah held up lined notebook paper covered in careful cursive. With the court's permission, I'll read a brief excerpt. My sister gave up $1 million to keep a promise to a grandmother she barely knew. The Johnsons gave me things. Rebecca gave me a home. There's a difference. I choose home. The judge accepted the statement and read it fully, his expression unreadable. Finally, Your Honor, letters of support from 40 members of the Havenwood community, teachers, business owners, clergy neighbors, all attesting to Miss Lewis's character and capability. Judge Rodriguez examined each document carefully. When he finished, he looked at me. Miss Lewis, why did you turn down $1 million? I stood my legs steadier than expected. My grandmother spent 10 years building a foundation of love in concrete and steel. She did it alone, in secret, knowing she might never see us again. She did it because she believed we'd need it someday. Taking that money would have been putting a price tag on her sacrifice. I couldn't do that. I won't do that. The judge nodded slowly. And Miss Emily Lewis, would you approach the bench? Emily stood and walked forward, small but straight-backed in jeans and a sweater Patricia had knitted for her. Why did you leave the Johnson home? They gave me a perfect life. Everything was beautiful and expensive and exactly right. She met his gaze directly. But Rebecca gives me family, and I finally understand there's a difference between what looks perfect and what actually is. Judge Rodriguez reviewed his notes one more time. The silence in the courtroom stretched like pulled taffy. Finally he spoke. I have reviewed every document in this file. I have read every letter. I have examined the photographs and the financial records and the caseworker's report. He looked directly at me. Miss Lewis, what you have accomplished in less than a year is extraordinary. You inherited a condemned structure and transformed it into a home. You inherited a significant debt and paid it in full. You inherited a fight with a well-funded corporation and refused to back down. More importantly, you inherited a legacy of love from a grandmother you barely knew, and you honored it. His voice softened slightly. The court finds that Rebecca Lewis has demonstrated both the capability and commitment necessary to serve as legal guardian. Full guardianship is granted effective immediately. The gavel came down with a sound like thunder. Emily ran to me, and we held each other while Robert and Patricia and Nancy and everyone else who'd made the drive applauded. Sarah Rodriguez smiled a rare break in her professional composure. Mark Anderson gathered his papers and left without a word. Outside the courthouse, snow was beginning to fall. Emily caught flakes on her tongue like she used to when we were kids before everything fell apart. We're really a family now. We've always been a family. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders. Now it's just legal. 1 year later, the house barely resembled the ruin I'd inherited. The exterior gleamed with fresh white paint. The porch stretched across the entire front, sturdy and level, with a handmade swing, where Emily and I sat most evenings watching the sun drop behind the mountains. The garden flourished with vegetables and herbs, the same varieties my grandmother had grown: tomatoes, basil, oregano, lavender. Flowers spilled from window boxes in riots of color. Inside, Emily's artwork covered nearly every wall. Oil paintings of the Montana landscape at different times of day. Watercolors of the spring so detailed you could almost hear the water. A charcoal portrait of our grandmother, drawn from the single photograph, hung in the living room. Her flower-dusted hands and gentle smile rendered in soft, gray strokes. Emily had transformed the bunker's corner into a proper studio. The space I'd prepared for her had grown to fill half the room. Easels, supply cabinets, a proper drafting table. Her art had changed since leaving the Johnson house. The drawings were no longer sad little houses representing dreams. They were bold, colorful, confident. Fields of wildflowers, sunsets over mountains. Our small white house with smoke curling from the chimney and two figures on the porch swing. She'd gotten a full scholarship to summer art camp, would start at Havenwood High in the fall with plans to apply to Montana State University's art program, the same school where my grandmother and Linda Brown had met 40 years ago. The same halls they'd walked, the same studios where they'd learned to see the world differently. I'd started Lewis Handyman Services 6 months after gaining guardianship. Robert had sold me his old truck for $2,000, a quarter of its actual value. Word spread through town about the girl who'd fixed up the Lewis place in 5 days. People called when their sinks leaked, when their doors stuck, when their fences needed repair. I learned on the job, making mistakes and fixing them, and slowly getting better. The income wasn't much, but it was enough. We didn't need much. Emily maintained a 3.8 GPA, won a $5,000 scholarship from the Montana Arts Foundation, made friends who came over to paint in the bunker studio, and stayed for Patricia's cooking and Robert's terrible carpentry puns. She was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with money, and everything to do with being seen and known and loved for exactly who she was. Christopher Martinez hadn't given up entirely. He'd filed 3 more complaints with the county, all dismissed. Offered $2 million last month. During a phone call I'd ended in 30 seconds. Sarah Rodriguez was making progress on the conservation easement, working with Montana State Parks to protect the spring in perpetuity. The legal process would take another 2 years, but when it finished, no corporation would ever be able to drain or privatize that water. Michelle Martin and 5 other families now had pipes running from the spring to their homes. Robert and George had helped me install the system's simple PVC that required only basic maintenance. I didn't charge them, just asked that they help maintain the system and keep it running for others who might need it. Michelle still brought cookies every week. Lily's drawings covered my refrigerator. On a Friday evening in late June, I told Emily I needed to check something in the bunker. She was painting headphones on, lost in the flow of color and light. I descended the stairs and pulled the steel door closed behind me. The space was exactly as my grandmother had left it. I'd never changed anything in the main room. The supplies remained organized on their shelves, though I'd replaced expired items and restocked as needed. The workbench sat in the center, the wood worn smooth by her hands and now by mine. I sat on the stool she must have used and pulled out her letter, the pages soft from being handled so many times. The words were committed to memory now, but I read them anyway. Let myself hear her voice in the careful script. Then I spoke out loud to the white walls that held a decade of her Saturdays. "Hi, Grandma. It's me again. I come down here every Friday evening, had been doing it for 6 months now, talking to someone who couldn't answer, but who I believed could still somehow hear. Emily got accepted to summer art camp, full scholarship. She painted a piece last week that made Patricia cry. Mountains at sunset with light breaking through clouds. She's so talented, Grandma. You would have loved watching her create." I ran my hand along the workbench surface. Robert and Patricia are like grandparents to us now. Patricia teaches Emily to bake. Robert's teaching her woodworking. She made a jewelry box last month that's actually pretty decent. Better than my first 3 attempts at anything involving mitered corners. The spring is still flowing. 47 families still have clean water. Christopher tried again last month. 2 million this time. I said no in 30 seconds. Sarah says the conservation easement should be finalized within 2 years. After that, the water's protected forever. I paused, gathering my thoughts. David Jones asked me to speak at church next month about you, about what you built and why it mattered. I said yes. Figured it was time people knew the truth about who you really were instead of the lies Richard Miller spread. Michelle's kids drew a picture of you last week. They never met you, but Lily said you looked like someone who'd give water to thirsty people. She was right. That's exactly what you did, what you still do through what you left behind. The bunker was quiet, except for my breathing and the faint sound of the generator's hum from the corner. I understand now, Grandma. You didn't just leave us money or land or this room. You left us a choice, the choice to become people who stand up for what matters, who protect the vulnerable, who build foundations for others even when nobody's watching. That's the real inheritance, not what you left us, but who you challenged us to become. And I hope I'm making you proud. I hope when you look down, if you can look down, you see 2 granddaughters who understand what you were trying to teach us. That love outlasts death. That home is something we build together, one board at a time, one act of kindness at a time. That the hard right is worth more than the easy wrong. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its box on the shelf. Stood and looked around the room one more time. The white walls, the careful shelves, the decade of hope made manifest in concrete and wood and unwavering belief. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, but I said them anyway. For building this, for believing in us, for loving us even when you couldn't know us, for teaching me what it means to choose legacy over money, struggle over comfort, family over everything. I climbed the stairs and emerged into evening light. Emily was on the porch swing, sketchbook in her lap pencil, moving across the page. She looked up when I approached, drawing the sunset, drawing you. She turned the sketchbook around. There I was, in charcoal and shadow, sitting at the workbench in the bunker, my hand on the letter. She'd captured something in the lines around my eyes, in the set of my shoulders, not just what I looked like, but who I'd become. "Becca, do you think Grandma can see us?" I sat beside her on the swing Robert had built, put my arm around her shoulders, and looked out at the mountains turning gold in the dying light. I think she always could, even when we couldn't see her. Even when the whole world told her to give up, she kept building because she could see us, who we'd become, what we'd need. We sat in comfortable silence, rocking gently, watching the stars emerge one by one above the spring that still flowed, the land that was ours, the home we'd built on a foundation of concrete and love. And I thought about the question that had haunted me since that first phone call from Sarah Rodriguez. What would you have chosen? $1 million and an easy life, or a legacy and a hard fight? I'd made my choice. Every morning I woke up in a house I'd rebuilt with my own hands. Every evening I sat with my sister and watched the sunset over mountains that belonged to us. Every day I protected water that kept families from going thirsty. That was worth more than any amount of money, worth every struggle, worth every sacrifice, because my grandmother had taught me something that couldn't be purchased or inherited or given. She'd taught me that the measure of a life isn't what you accumulate, but what you protect. Not what you take, but what you build. Not what you're given, but what you give. Have you ever had to choose between the easy path and the right one? Between money and meaning, between comfort and legacy? The answer isn't always clear until you're standing in the middle of it, holding everything you own in one hand and a choice in the other. I chose right over easy, legacy over money, family over everything. And sitting here with my sister on this swing, watching stars emerge over land we'd fought to keep, I knew I'd make the same choice every single time. If this story reminded you that love can outlast death, that home is something we build together, that the hard right is worth more than the easy wrong, then maybe you understand what my grandmother was trying to teach. Maybe you know that some things are worth fighting for, even when the whole world tells you to walk away. Subscribe if you believe in second chances. Comment if you've ever had to protect something that mattered more than money. Share this if you know that the best inheritances aren't measured in dollars, but in the foundations we build for the people who come after us. Because 47 families still have clean water. Because Emily has a home and a future and a sister who will never give up on her. Because a woman who died alone and forgotten built something that outlasted every lie told about her. Because love, real love, doesn't quit. It builds, it endures, it wins. That's what my grandmother taught me, and that's what I'll spend the rest of my life teaching everyone who needs to know you're worth fighting for. Your dreams are worth protecting. And home is something we build together, one choice at a time, one sacrifice at a time, one act of stubborn love at a time. The spring keeps flowing, the house keeps standing, and we keep choosing the hard right over the easy wrong every single day.